Now that I've secured myself, what am I expressing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do love the 5th house.
Yeah, it is the house of little fortune, which is nice. And not little as in like insignificant, but little as in, I like to think it's like cute, because it is the joy of Venus, which is really fun. So you think about Venus as being the minor, but only because she's smaller than Jupiter fortune. So you get your little personal life fortunes happening there, which is why the 5th house also does things like gambling and vacations.
Absolutely. And I'm going to add 2 points to that, if I may.
Yeah.
Something I always think about in the 5th house is my friend, astrologer Spencer Michaud, who's wonderful, says the 5th house is kind of like a legacy house. And I love that idea. Where we come from is the matter of the 4th, but the 5th is sort of how we choose to put our, to what we leave, our mark we leave on the world to some extent. It's different, of course, in the 10th and the 11th, but there's something about what we choose to create and produce.
I like that. Yeah.
Participant, why not? Cool. Okay. Hello,
is it on? This is gonna be the awkward thing. It still says scheduled, it doesn't say live.
Oh, go live.
Hey, there we go.
Ooh, wow,
we got it. Aries season is about to begin, and we are finally able to begin this live.
Oh man, I'm telling you. So hello, KristaLyn.
Hello, CV. It's good to see you.
We are Ask Me Astros.
Yes. And so today we're going to be answering a question from someone who submitted their question. And we will also be covering lightly the topics of a lot of other people who submitted as well. So even if we're not featuring your specific chart today, you will have at least some kind of answer to a little bit of what you asked. And we're really excited to be able to share it with you. We've got notes, we've got details, we've got data. I even have pages for source texts. So I think we're ready to go.
I have a mug.
I have a mug as well, but I like yours better.
What do I name him? I'm named Herbert. I think that's Herbert.
Herbert.
So we, I guess we should we introduce ourselves. We know this. You're KristaLyn, I think.
I'm KristaLyn. Yes.
I'm still
as far as I know.
As far as I know. And we do this monthly podcast recording YouTube video where we respond to a chart submission, and we answer a question.
Yes.
And yeah.
So this is Ask Me Astros. If you want to submit your chart, you can always email it to askmeastros.com. You don't have to email your actual chart, but your question along with some birth data so that we can look at your chart. And then we will select a chart that we feel is very pertinent to the transits that are coming up so that everyone gets a benefit, but also that individual person gets a particular reading, and anyone who's watching gets to see what it's like to actually do a little bit of light work as a practicing astrologer. Throughout the broadcast, we will, wink, wink, be sharing a 10% off discount code so that no matter what, you have the opportunity to have a reading with one or both of us using that code. Fun fact, you can use it on both of our websites. It will work both times.
Yes. All of that. Now, before we get started, how are you? What's going on? What are you feeling?
So I'm feeling, I'm curious is the emotion I'm choosing for the coming year. Curiosity.
It's a positive.
Yeah. So this is my, in lieu of all the crazy that's happening, I know that my role of influence or my sphere of influence is with me and with the things that are around me. So I'm curious to observe what the world does. And I'm really interested and excited to take action in a way that I can take action, however that shows up available to me. So looking at even the Aries ingress, which we're experiencing today, it is the equinox, which is super fun. I'm someone who really prefers more daylight. So I'm excited to be moving into longer days, and I'm excited to be moving into spring up here in the Northern Hemisphere anyway. And my condolences to anybody who's going in the opposite direction and is not happy about it. I feel you. So I'm excited and I'm curious. And I think that those are some really great Aries words to use.
And I must say here, because I am not a shy Aries, that today then makes it my solar return.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm 0 degrees Aries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tomorrow is your actual birthday for anybody who's listening and wants to have birthday wishes.
But my solar return.
Yes. The solar return. You're officially one return older. How's it feel? So this is the day, for another fun fact for astrologers, that you would begin your next annual perfection. You get a
Yes.
new Time Lord today.
That's really exciting. Sometimes as astrologers, we're not staring at I look at the chart at least once a day, but it's not always the first thing in the morning. Maybe I'm a little embarrassed to admit that. So yeah, I'm really excited that I am sharing the first day of my new solar profection with you, especially because we were just at a profection retreat in
Yes.
Palm Springs with Kelly Surtees, like a month and a half ago.
Yeah, end of January.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are perfections? Just a little fun fact for people who don't know.
So, fun fact about perfections is when you look at your chart, which is going to look kind of like a clock or maybe a pizza pie with 12 slices, each slice is going to be featured in a different year of your life, starting at 1. Kayla says happy birthday, by the way.
Happy birthday.
So starting at the first house, which you'll see at around the 9 o'clock position on your chart, when you're born, I like to say it this way: when you're born, your primary concern is existing. So you're in a first house perfection year. And then from 0 to 1 of age, you move through that first house perfection year, getting to know the world, your life, your perspectives as a little baby. And then you move through each house 1 year at a time until you get to 12. And then at 13, you start all over again. And we do that in cycles throughout our entire lives. So your first house, your second house might be about resources and supporting yourself and all of those keywords that go along with each house. But then you have the Time Lord. The Time Lord is the ruler of the sign that occupies the house that is highlighted by annual perfection. So if you are an Aries rising, which I know you're not, you're a Gemini rising, right?
I'm a Leo rising.
Leo, oh, I forgot. The hair's I always say, like, you have gorgeous hair, and that's why I remember you're a Leo rising. Yeah. So for a Leo rising, if you were in a first house perfection year, and I know you're not in a first house perfection year right now, but you would be watching the sun. If you were in a Gemini perfection year, you'd be watching Mercury as Mercury navigates around from your birthday to your next birthday, because that might show you kind of like it's like playing a third person video game.
Yeah.
Where Mercury is your avatar moving around the world in that game. So you watch what Mercury is doing and you get a little bit of the previews of what the storyline is saying regarding your life in the context of the themes of the house that is highlighted for you. How would you explain it?
Yeah, all of that. Plus, I think the perfection years are nice because I always think when you start the first house, right, it's a new cycle. And so you can go through and you could sort of see like somewhere in the life, evolution of something you're building. It's nice. Like you can look at it for general themes. But as you get older, as I am, you can go back and you can like check into the last time that house was perfected. It's nice. It's just another way to sort of track time, hop into your story. If anyone cares, I'm in a 5th house perfection year. Venus is my Time Lord. I went from Mars to Venus. No, I lied.
If you have a fire rising, you don't have Venus.
No, I don't know why. I really love Venus.
Yeah.
And
so Jupiter, right? Jupiter's the Time Lord for Sagittarius?
Yes. And if anyone can guess my age, you get a prize. But only in the live. So anyone can guess it right now. But yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, 5th house perfections tend to bring up ideas. I don't know. I think of creativity, but also perhaps the idea of children, right? You go from the 4th house of like, what's my foundation? Like, where do I want to live? To the 5th house of like, okay, now what am I building in the world?
Yeah. Now that I've secured myself, what am I expressing? Yeah.
I do love the 5th house.
Yeah, it is the house of little fortune, which is nice. And not little as in like insignificant, but little as in, I like to think it's like cute, because it is the joy of Venus, which is really fun. So you think about Venus as being the minor, but only because she's smaller than Jupiter. Fortune. So you get your little personal life fortunes happening there, which is why the 5th house also does things like gambling and vacations.
Absolutely. And I'm going to add 2 points to that, if I may. Something I always think about in the 5th house is my friend astrologer Spencer Michaud, who's wonderful, says the 5th house is kind of like a legacy house. And I love that idea. Where we come from is the matter of the 4th, but the 5th is sort of how we choose to put to what we leave like our mark we leave on the world to some extent. You know, it's different, of course, in the 10th and the 11th, but there's something about what we choose to create and produce.
I like that. Yeah. Because it's the passions as
Mm-hmm.
compared to the missions, maybe.
Oh, I like
Yeah.
that. And I will also say I had a wonderful talk last night with Kristen Mathis and
Yes.
Cosmic Spirit Auntie, and we were talking about Venus, and she's a wonderful scholar who transcribes the Orphic hymns for those who don't know. And we are going through the planets together, and it's interesting that we say, oh, Venus is the minor benefic or the lesser benefic, or whatever, but she's like, for the Greeks, Venus was the end all be all, like Venus was it. So I wanted to give due respect
Yes.
to Venus there.
Give Venus the credit she deserves now that she's in Taurus and feeling dignified again.
I think that's why I'm so excited. I'm like, oh, Venus and Taurus, Venus and Taurus.
Yeah.
Just living it.
So right.
With that, I guess we can hop into the chart.
Yeah. Do we want to, so we're going to share the chart. It will not have any of the data associated with it. It will not have the name because that is the person's privacy. And so what we're going to see is just the chart itself, and it's lovely. Look at that beautiful little chart. So for this person, do we want to start with the question this person had, or do we want to do a brief overview of what we see in the chart initially?
Ooh, hold the phones. We have something else. Why don't we, before we hop into this chart, because this is going to be the meat of it, why don't we had a lot of other really wonderful questions we couldn't address. So maybe let's address some of those.
Okay.
And then we'll hop into the chart. Is that cool with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Especially since some of the questions we had were the same. Isn't it funny how around the same time people will start having similar questions, and then you think, wow, what are the transits doing? And with a lot of things changing and moving into different houses, it made a lot of sense that people who have been experiencing things in certain areas of their lives are now wondering, well, what happens when it moves out? Last month on this same show, we did Saturn return and post Saturn return. So if you're interested in that, you can absolutely check out last month's show on the YouTube channel, and which you're probably on or have a link to somewhere in the description here. And so we talked about, what happens during your Saturn return, what happens after. We're going to talk a little bit about during once again today, because as you can see, this person is entering their Saturn return. They have Saturn in Pisces in the 7th house. It's going to be a little while before they have to worry about Saturn really approaching their Saturn. And yes, we do have a YouTube. It's Ask Me Astros, correct?
It is Ask Me Astros.
Yeah. So it is, as it says on the tin of this video, Ask Me Astros, and we'll be posting there monthly. Yeah. So do we want to start with the angular triads and break into the cadent houses, or do we want to start with, actually, let's do that. And kind of break down the chart. Sorry,
I'm going to pop in for a minute. No, I actually just want to address, we did the Saturn return. Hold on. I had some notes here. Okay. I'm going to take a detour here for a moment though. The Saturn return is, we had some questions about Saturn return, and I think those are absolutely important, and we do have the videos you referred people to, but there is something I do want to address that people were asking. A lot of people wanted to know, well, this idea of what's going on next year, which, the simple answers to that are sign up for a reading, or we also just launched our Patreon where you can actually study with us, and there's some ways there so you can actually explore your chart month by month with us. But I want to know, KristaLyn, if we could actually back up and talk a little bit about the logic of astrology, because one question that we did have, people were wondering, what's with all the empty houses? Like, how does that work? And I realized we've never actually backed up to talk about the framework or this logic behind the chart.
Absolutely. Do you want me to start with that?
You start and I'll take it over.
All right, cool. So when you look at a chart, it used to be rectangular in the original way that they used to draw them, but now we have a circle, which is quite convenient. So you look at a circle, and again, it looks like kind of a pizza pie with 12 slices to it. Those 12 slices represent 12 houses, which is breaking the actual sky into pieces. So the reason a circular chart is convenient is because it kind of mimics in 2D the sky, the dome of the sky, and then the sky beneath us as well. That, from our perspective, someone in Australia might be seeing the sky beneath us. So everything you see at the bottom half of the chart here, from underneath that AS to underneath, its direct opposite degree is what is underneath the horizon. Everything above that AS over to the DS degree is what was in the sky at the time. So we can see that this chart is of someone who was born a little bit after midday. And in fact, they were born around 2 in the afternoon. So you can see because the sun has moved past that middle point. So it's past noon or past the middle of the day. It also depends on your latitude and longitude. So sometimes you want to keep an eye on that.
I'm going to kind of bounce off that to say that the beauty of a circular chart as well is it gives us a picture of the sky, right? Mm-hmm. So we could see that this person, like as you mentioned, was born during the day. We can see that it was a Mercury that night, and Venus, I think I'm getting this right, would have been visible as evening stars, right? So we can really start to get this. Yeah.
Yep.
Did it right.
I was like leaning into the camera to look at the mini chart, but I have the chart bigger over here. And I was like, that'd be weird. Krista, move over that way.
So we can really get this sort of beautiful just picture of like, okay, like we're looking at this frozen moment in time. And I think that's something to remember. And may I give you my little spiel that I do for?
Oh, please. Yes.
Describe the chart. And maybe I'll make this interactive. So for me, at least, if there's a simple logic behind what we do. And if you learn this logic, it's like, it's just this on varying degrees of complexity, right? So we think about, there's 3 components here. There are the planets themselves, right? Planets all have things that they want to do, right? Venus wants to bind, Mars wants to sever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these planets all have homes or places that they're resourced, they can do what they want, right? The same way that KristaLyn is in their house right now. KristaLyn can easily grab a book at this moment. And so when we're looking at the chart, one of the first questions we want to ask is, where is a planet? Is it in its own home or is it in someone else's home? Can it see the ruler of that house, right? We see this sort of guest host, conversation, right? This very sort of animate thing we can look at. And then the other part of all of this, of course, is these sections 1 through 12, which we could say, together create the breadth of a human existence. So, 1 being the rising, where you come into the world. So this is the physical body or psychology, right? 2 through 11 is the world around you. So plants these houses can represent people in your life, events you might encounter, et cetera, et cetera. So together, when we put those things together, almost like a game of musical chairs, the ascendant marks the entire chart, we can start to see this beautiful, I want to say, character drama that is the potential of your life. Did I get that right?
Yeah, no. And I'm also, you inspired me to look up a quote that I use when I present on astrology being a form of storytelling.
Ooh,
do you mind if I share a quote from Plotinus?
Please do.
So Plotinus was a Neoplatonic philosopher, and a big discussion that goes on that is something for you to decide for yourself. But one of the things that Plotinus spoke on was, are the stars causes? Do they make stuff happen down here, or do we make stuff happen up there? Who's on first and what's on second, essentially? And so Plotinus decided that no, they're not causes, but in describing what he thought they were, he says, let us suppose that the stars are like characters always being written on the heavens, or written once for all and moving as they perform their task. So again, it's sort of the planets being the verb, or the planets being the character taking action, and then the houses being sort of the context and moving in and interacting with each other. So I thought that was really a cool source to cite and support CV's brilliant description.
I love it. And you, for those who don't know, this is a topic that you lecture on.
I do.
And so if anyone catches you, do you have, are any of your lectures available for purchase or on your website or anything right now?
Yeah, there's the one I did for Astromagia 2022 is available on the website. It's actually more of a workshop that shows you how to derive a story from your chart or from a moment where you had an idea to have a story. And that's my favorite quote in the entire thing, because as a writer, you think Plotinus put the plot in Plotinus, and I'm going to make a t-shirt. One day I will have a t-shirt of putting the plot in Plotinus about whether or not
idea. Well, my Mars and Aries will come for you. Yeah.
Bring it. That'd be great.
And also, shameless plug, you and I just offered we just launched our Patreon where
Mhm.
we're going to have a monthly cohort where we do a little bit of like writing workshop around the planets every month. So if you want to really dig into the storytelling idea further with us, there are ways to join us.
Mhm.
And now I think we've answered the questions. We can really dive into this chart.
One second.
Yeah.
For anybody who's interested, because in case you're wondering how to do that, we can do this. Ta-da! Join our Patreon. So that's kind of convenient. So yeah, diving into this chart, one of the things now that we've talked about the houses kind of being broken up that way is that you can see that you can also break them up into kind of little quarters of three houses each. And in astrology, especially in like more traditional astrology, we call these the angular triad. And if you think of, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, because you said that. I want to make sure we clarify it for people because to me it almost sounded like decans. So you're saying that each there's explain that better. Pretend I don't know anything about astrology.
Yeah. So I was just about to try. So what we have is, again, you have the whole pizza here. If you took a quarter of the pizza and then broke that quarter into 3 slices, you'd have 3 houses.
Perfect.
Now, these houses form an angular triad.
Okay.
And so the angular triad starts with the angular houses, and the angular houses are the easiest to spot because they have what we call the angles in them. So that's the AS there is your ascendant. The MC is your midheaven. The DS is your descendant. And then the IC is the opposite of your midheaven. It's called the Imum Cole. So it's not as easy to like just associate. Those are your angular houses.
Oh, you're going to kill me.
Oh, no, why?
But not everyone. So I think we should just clarify the angular houses as being 1, 7, 4, and 10, because not everybody has their MC on an angle.
Yeah, no.
Right? Because I can get my MC in the 9th, some people in the 11th.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're lucky that this chart actually follows the 1, 7, 10, and 4.
Yes.
But you're right. Sometimes depending on the latitude and longitude, again, you can have a midheaven, as I do, in the 11th house or in the 9th house. Sometimes it'll go all the way into the other houses.
Yes.
That complicates, or I don't want to say complicates, it adds layers and flavor to the interpretation. It's still in some ways considered angular, but the house itself, you're right, is definitely the 1st, 7th, 10th, and 4th. Those are the ones that you want to look at. And that's a little bit like the hierarchy that we look at them would probably be what? 1st, 10, 7, 4th.
Absolutely. Right? And as another great astrologer,
around the clock.
Mickey Parano says, right, the angles of your life, right?
Yeah.
1st house, who are you? 4th house, where are you from? 7th house, who are you with?
Yeah.
10th house, what do you do? Right? Yeah. When something hits one of those, your whole life goes into chaos or joy. Right.
Yeah. But you would also think of the 4 angles as like your small talk elevator things, right? When you meet people for the first time, these are the things that they typically ask about. Where are you from? Who are you with? And what do you do? So that's kind of helpful. Those are small talk angles. So those, of course, then are the angular houses of a chart, especially in a whole sign chart, because when you get into quadrant houses, then the MC becomes the cusp of the 10th house and it remains angular no matter what. We use whole sign because it's our preferred. It's what we learned in. It works for us. We have all of our reasons. And it's also really easy to teach with on top of all those things. So you get to see that here.
And I tell you a fun trick when you use whole sign houses and you meet people and you can start calculating their charts in your head. It's fantastic.
Yeah, because you can be like, oh, you're a Leo rising. And that's how I knew that you weren't going into your Venus year earlier, because I knew that 5 from Leo is not a Venus sign. So it's really convenient and handy. Awesome. Cool. So then we look at triad, meaning 3. Right? So if we have the angle, this is like the action scene in a movie. This is where the stuff happens. This is where it's most obvious that something is going down. So you have what happened before that, and then you have what happened after it to also consider. That's where you get the house that comes before it, which is considered cadent. It doesn't have a ton of energy. We're going to talk about this more later because there were questions about cadent houses. That leads into the energy of the angular house, which then kind of distributes its energy through the succeeding house, succeeding the angular house. So these things kind of tell us a beginning, middle, and end of a story in their own right. And then you get another beginning when you get to the next cadent house, another middle when you get to the angular, another end. So we're breaking this larger story of your entire chart into smaller flows or maybe scenes in the movie. To kind of help with that. We use it in timing techniques for a lot of different things. Each type of sign will have its own strength to it. Again, angular, big stuff happening. When stuff happens to those points in your chart, as CV said, that's when you notice it. It's more in your personal sphere. It's almost happening like to you, with you. In the other ones, it may not be exactly in front of you. It may be something that's in your peripheral, happening with people around you, something you recognize, and in an area of your life that's not as directly impacting you as the angulars.
I'm gonna sort of add on to this though,
Yes.
and where this conversation gets really tricky and interesting to me, because I think when you say the cadent houses, there's we have to think about when our planets are resourced and what they can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I always think about this, and I bother you and Larry every week when we have these discussions, that the sun, right, has its joy in the ninth house, which is a cadent house, right, which is also trine the ascendant, which is you. And so there's something to be said, right? Even though the ninth house is cadent, it's not like if you have a sun in the ninth, you're just going to like kind of go through life floating. Maybe there's more of a focus on you've dropped from the angle. You want to hide, you want to study, you want to go into this sort of monastic life, and you aren't like making money in the 10th. So we, just to say that these, you know, the each of the houses that support the angles have their own conversation too.
Absolutely. And this kind of makes me think of the fact that we do have a couple questions asking about cadent houses. And there's something about cadent, right? It gets sort of the worst reputation because it's considered inactive.
Yeah.
But if you reference, I'm going to give you my first reference source and page here. We look at Demetra George and her Ancient Astrology Volume 2. On page 618 to 619, she talks about cadent houses, and she uses a Greek term that I absolutely love. It is my favorite thing. As someone who has a lot in their cadent houses, my third 9 axis is very busy. So when I look at cadent houses, the word that Demetra uses and the word that was used to describe them back in the ancient times when Greek was actually the language was metakosmios. And that is the space between spaces. And to quote a little bit more directly, though these are called, in Greek, they're apoklino, maybe, they're called the slope or the falling away. So they're generally weak and ineffective. However, they can be energized by a 3-degree orb to the angular placement. So if something is trine that area, which would be in the ascendant or in the 5th house or something like that, especially for the 9th house situation. If something is trine the sort of cusp or something in that sign, then it gets a lot of support. It's giving borrowed energy to that. But then the metakosmios is considered an alternate state of consciousness, behaviors, or state of mind. So rather than conducting worldly or everyday business, you're doing the more subconscious business. You're doing the more liminal space business. So it's not as active in the world, creating physical results, but it is really building the beliefs that lead you to be able to take those actions.
Absolutely. And if you think about like 9th house, I was listening to an Alan Watts lecture recently, who was talking about how it's hard being a literary man because you start to doubt yourself because you're like, what am I actually producing, right? If you're a farmer or like someone who fixes cars, look at my jobs, you produce something in the world and people see your value, right? But if you're very intertwined with the 9th house, you're a philosopher, you look at astrology charts all day, you're not exactly busy in the 10th, and people might start to look at you like a little weird. Like, what are you contributing to society? This sort of mental energy. Something to bring forth there too. And interesting too, like the 3rd house is a little bit of that too, right? The house of goddess as well.
Yeah. So in ancient astrology, this is a great point. The 9th house is considered the house of God. And then the third house is considered the house of goddess. So no, we're not necessarily thinking your typical monotheistic or whatever mindset. We're thinking more of a balance of divine feminine and masculine in divinity. So you have the ninth house of God, the third house of goddess. The ninth house is your religion, your spiritual practice, your worldviews, the beliefs that inform your decisions and the way you see the world. The third house can often deal with divination. And different like sorts of fortune telling and those daily practices or rituals that kind of are your daily reminders of that larger worldview. So you can see again how we're talking about axis here. They complement each other, which is really cool.
So, woo. So, which is all to say, how do you want to break this up when we go talk about, we mentioned the angular triads. Mm-hmm. Should we talk about like because we have some questions for this chart. I'm wondering if we should talk a little bit about like what each of the angular triads do in the world, if that makes sense.
If you'd like to, we can go into that. Yeah.
Or how do you usually break? Because I always think about the like, do you want to look at them of like what each of the house, we kind of talked about what each of the houses do. Mm-hmm. Do you ever look at kind of carrying on this idea of, right, we've been talking about the ninth house is this Cadent house, but it's interesting to see. I always think about what is the name for this? That you have would this be the angular triads, to look at the houses that support each of them? Like we look at the ninth house and the houses that support it, or the 10th house.
The 10th house and the houses that
support them.
Yeah, those are the angular triads. So, yes. For your example of the 10th house is among certain things, it's career, life direction, reputation, things like that. So the ninth house supports it by building into it, right? And then the 11th house are the people who are also supporting it. So the ninth house is your beliefs, which support what you do.
Yep.
And then the people who benefit from or support you doing more of that ends up being in the 11th house of like friends and society. Is that kind of the direction you were going?
I like that, but I'm going to take an alternative view as well.
Do it.
Right. Like I think when we look at each of the angles, because the angles we know are the stake tent posts of everyone's life, right? So for instance, if we look at the 10th house, we know that the second house and by trine, right? So the second house and the 6th house support it, which says a little bit about what the 10th house is trying to do in the world, right? The second house is maybe your money. 10th house is like what you're doing in the world. The 6th house is the work no one wants to do. So thinking about it like everyone. So when we start to look at the cadence, right, they're supporting an angle, like everyone's supporting an angle.
Yeah. So I thought we were still talking angular triads. You're talking about the trine houses, which support the different houses, which is also mentioned in the quote there by Dimitri George, especially if they're within 3 degrees of something in that house. So that's the beauty of trines.
Yeah.
And how they do support each other in theme, which is really cool to think about. It also reminds me of, again, your axis, the opposites will have a similar theme like we talked about. So now we're getting into aspect theory in houses, which is pretty cool. But we did have that other question, and I want to get myself back on track here because I thought about it and then I lost it super fast.
Well, she was talking about the question. So maybe I'll just finish this thought if I may.
Yeah.
So the reason I mentioned this is because the person in this chart said, okay, I have a house, like I have Cadent planets. Like what does this mean? Do I have no direction? Which is sort of the answer is no.
Not necessarily true.
And we will kind of jump into that. I think there's a difference between Cadent houses and houses that can't see the ascendant, but that's
that's where we're going. Yeah.
I'll look back that for a moment. But just to say that so thinking about the angles and what supports them. So the 10th house supported by the 2nd and the 6th. The 1st house is supported by the 9th, the Cadent house. So the who you are, right, gets nurturing by that 9th house of study, right? Not to sort of undermine this. The 5th house of that coming back, that legacy house, the house of children, what you create, right? These are the things that support the human soul, perhaps. The other angle, let's see, the 4th house, interestingly enough, right, the home foundation is supported by the 12th house, right, a Cadent house, and an 8th house, both the dark houses. Interesting to think about, right? So if we can think about these this way too, we can start to think about each house has its purpose and what it supports, right? And then the 7th, of course, the house of relationship, of marriage, of one-on-one, like I'm going to merge with you, being supported by the 11th and the third Cadent house, right? And so thinking about this idea that Larry Arrington always says, like this idea that to be in one-on-one relationship, you need the community support. So when we think about all of this to say, when we think about Cadent houses, I wouldn't just go, oh my God, my planet has no energy. I would go, what larger story is it part of? Whether it's the trines, right? Or the angular triad itself.
Yeah, it reminds me of the anime. Which friends is it fighting with? Like, who are the friends? What's the power of friendship doing here?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's because the chart is a circle. Everything does relate to everything else in one way or another. We broke it up into sections so that we could identify specific things, but really it's a whole picture. And, that's why it's so cool to think about, when the chart reflects someone accurately, which is how it should go. You don't need to fit into your chart. It's not like trying to squeeze yourself into, the traveling pants or anything like that. The chart should reflect you. And if it does, it can be super affirming and give you insight into areas of your life that maybe, as with the dark houses, you don't always get to see clearly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Little segue there.
Yeah, I'll let you make that segue.
Yeah. So let's talk about the dark houses. We know about the angular houses already. You're 1, you're 10, you're 7, you're 4. Now imagine that's a car. This is how I heard Rick Levine describe it in his talk last year at NORWAC. And I really appreciated this analogy. So you have your first house, and that's your windshield. You're looking out of that. That's how you navigate everything. It's the first stuff you see. But then you have your blind spots on a car. So if you look at the 7th house, that's your rear view window, right? But you can't see those blind spots back there. And you also have blind spots at those 4 corners, which is why you use rear view mirrors, why you use a backup cam if you need to, or look over your shoulder. That would be this 12 to 6th and 8th houses. And in this one, they're really easy to see in this particular chart because they are all of the empty houses. So for this example, actually, this person's chart's really helpful because all of the houses that are empty on this chart are the houses that I'm talking about. Now, it's always going to be those houses. Those houses are not going to always be empty. So, take this for as useful as it is. But those are the blind spots. And even in this chart, as they are empty houses, the trick with empty houses, just as an aside, is to look for the ruler of those houses. So for this person, if those really are blind spots, they want to look in the area for the sake of the 8th house, look at where Mars is in Taurus and get some context off of that to see how they can dive into that blind spot a little bit more or how that expresses in their life.
So I'm going to clarify real quick.
Yeah.
I'm going to pretend like I don't know anything about astrology just to firm that up. So as you mentioned, right, I love the car analogy. 12, 6, 8 are the blind spots here. Those houses can't see the ascendant. The ascendant is you. That's important to remember, or your windshield. But again, coming back to the idea that planets all rule houses, right? So that's why we're going to look to Mars for the 8th, because Aries is the home of Mars. Just to sort of slow that down.
Did I not mention that? I'm so sorry.
Oh no, you did. Sometimes you know so much, KristaLyn. You just like
I have Jupiter in the 9th and it's exalted. He doesn't really know how to do the minimum. So I appreciate that you have that measuring that you can do. It's so cool. Yeah, so they are the blind spot houses, and they are that because we talked about trines before, and we talked about if you want to talk about squares, they are the angles. So again, the 10th is square. It forms a right angle with the 1st. Same for the 4th. And then you have the opposition of the 7th. So they can all see each other. Whether they're giving each other pretty glances or angry glares, that's a different story, depending on the nature of the aspect. They can see each other. You also have sextiles. So if you do a sign and then skip one, and then technically it's the second sign from that. So you have 1, skip 2, end up in 3. That's a sextile, because if you drew it all the way around, you would get a 6-sided figure, right? So we have a sextile. All of these things are lines that contribute to a greater shape if they went all the way around the chart. Is there anything that we need to add on to that?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. I thought so.
So what KristaLyn is saying is there is this thing called aspect theory that we could draw on this beautiful tool called the Thema Mundi, which describes these aspects beautifully. We will go into that in a different session. I think that should be great bonus content, which is to say that there are aspects defined when a planet is an aspect, and these aspects are drawn out as you just did. That means a planet can see each other. Planets can see each other only through aspects. So, and which is to say they can communicate. But these houses that we call dark houses, right? They do not have an aspect, a traditional aspect to the ascendant. That's you, right? And so it's important. So in this way, we would say that these houses are dark because they can't see the person, right? And as such, planets in these houses perhaps we're blind to them, if that makes sense. I'm going to hop in here to this person's question. This person said, I have Cadent planets. Does this mean I don't know the direction of my life? Well, the answer is no. But getting back to this, when you first look to a chart, we might want to see what the ascendant is, who that person is, and the ascendant ruler. And we want to see, coming back to this aspects, does the ascendant ruler have an aspect to the first house? Now, when the ascendant is in, or any other planet, but we'll start with the ascendant, is in one of those, quote, dark houses, this is where I think the person here was getting at, although it's not the case in their chart, because you see that their Mercury is in the 11th, so it can see the ascendant. But say that Mercury was in the 12th, it couldn't see the ascendant. And sometimes I've noticed people who have charts like this, it's not that they're going around the world aimlessly, but sometimes it can feel that they're driven by things beyond themselves. You meet people who have the ruler of the ascendant in the 8th house, and maybe they have lives where they're maybe concerned with other people's problems. A lot of them end up like business managers and things like this because they're constantly absorbed with other people's resources, perhaps. Or sometimes with ruler of the ascendant in the 12th, you see people who might have some issues with a little bit of dark night of the soul themes in life. Not always, right? Or people who want to spend more time alone, et cetera, et cetera. But there is that feeling that when a planet is in one of these houses, you don't quite have immediate access to it because you literally can't see it. Did I explain that correctly?
Yeah. And I think another way to encapsulate what you said, which is very amazing, is that this person with a lot of planets in those hidden houses or dark houses, they may not be an athlete or someone who works with their hands or someone who does day-to-day things that are more physically involved. They may be someone who practices magic, someone who's more into religion, someone who is more into the spiritual side of things. And so you have that dichotomy where there is room for all types of people in the world, and that there isn't a bad type to worry about being. The one thing that I think about when I hear this question, and this is not the first time I've heard this question, and I don't necessarily think it's the tone that this person was asking in, but to ask, when people say, oh my gosh, do I just not have any direction in my life? My first thought is, I don't know. Do you? Like, how are you feeling right now? Because again, this is a chart that reflects your nature and certain things that we can draw out of it. But if you're feeling like you're lacking direction in your life, and you've always felt that way, we'll probably find that in the chart. This isn't something I would see in this chart necessarily.
I see it. May I tell you? It's hopping out at me.
Oh, where is it?
You know what I see?
Mercury in Cancer, or
I see you get the sun in Gemini, which is like, I want to do all the things, this, that, the other, right? Gemini is like, I'm going to be a baker, a candlestick maker, and the other, whatever that one was, I don't remember that nursery rhyme. And then you get the Virgo rising that's like, but I'm trying to fit it all together. How do I make this make sense? How do there's that anxiety of like, oh my God, I'm doing all the things, but how do I do the thing that's right? How do I choose?
Counterpoint. I don't necessarily think it's the person lacking direction. I think it's overthinking and other people's expectations.
Absolutely.
They have the lot of fortune next to the MC. So lots of stuff goes well. But when they get the feedback of people where Mercury is in the 11th house in Cancer, I really, as someone with a Mercury in Cancer, Mercury wants to have function that makes Mercury feel included and useful to the community. And so if they don't receive that feedback with what they're doing, this person will probably move on to the next thing and then be looking again, saying, did I do good this time? And so it may not be that they are lacking direction. It may be that they're lacking feedback and support.
Oh, and also maybe too much direction. Like I said, that Gemini and the mutable rising, there's and this and that,
Yeah, or like everybody loves everything I do. Which thing is actually me? I
yeah.
notice this a lot with air signs, right? Because they're so, especially Libra and Gemini,
Yeah.
because they are so involved. Libra being ruled by Venus, so relationships and things,
Mhm.
but also Mercury ruling Gemini, connections with people. Aquarius gets a minor pass being with Saturn, so they kind of remove themselves from the fray. But it's this whole involvement with, have I functioned well? Have I done something useful? And Aquarius gets that as well, but they're less likely to let you know about it.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to tell you I'm doing great. You're the one who has a problem. That kind of stuff. Um, Saturn coming out again. But yeah, you're right. It's again a lack of knowing when. It reminds me of what are they're called spuddies in
Ooh,
Over the Hedge. It's a movie,
yeah,
and they're basically like Pringles. Enough is never enough, and that's a very Gemini experience to have.
absolutely. And it is beautiful. Like I mean, that's a heavy Mercury chart, right? Like you get the Virgo. I always think of Virgo too, is that the Gemini wants to do maybe all the things,
Mm-hmm.
or this
Yeah.
particular Gemini, is the, I'm not going to, well, it's for a second. There is that sense of like multiplicity, but I
Mm-hmm.
do think that Virgo is sort of, it's interesting because Virgo is mutable, but I think it's also sort of trying to make sense of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's how do I take it all and make it make sense, but also
Yeah.
like a little, I feel like Virgo risings can have that anxiety about how there's this concern with material reality. And so
Mm-hmm.
you get all these ideas, but then there's this bit of like, well, will this one work? Will it make
Yeah.
sense? Will it make
Or
sense for me?
yeah, or the Gemini or jack of all trades, the Virgo master of every single one that I can be master of.
Ooh, yeah.
Right. So it's that pressure to excel at literally everything you're doing and to try to do all the things.
And
Uh,
and then we get like Saturn in the seventh, like staring down the first house
with the moon.
with the
Yeah.
moon. Like you,
Yeah.
like that's like the disciplinarian.
Yeah. Man, I want to do all the things, but I don't know if I have the energy all the time.
I don't know if I can. I
Yeah.
don't know. Is
And
this
the Saturn and the moon, especially the moon in the seventh in Pisces, has very attached emotional attachment to the value they bring to the other person,
yeah.
to the other person who's involved, their emotional state. So again, we have this situation of really needing that validation externally.
Yeah.
And I want to make the argument that that's not always a bad thing.
No.
Sometimes gauging from the results of your work is really great feedback, as long as it doesn't take away from your own ability to thrive and exist. And, sometimes with Pisces, especially with Saturn there, a great lesson is learning how to be still or be in silence and be on your own and feel safe and calm the mind, which is difficult for a lot of people to do, but especially if you've got a heavy Mercury, uh,
Mm.
being
I
able to do that.
I was thinking too, or if we're going to jump to that moon, right? That moon in Pisces, which I think of sort of sense of being super intuitive and like all the feels. It rules that 11th house with the Mercury and
Mhm.
Venus.
Mhm.
And so to me, it feels like when it comes, like this is a very social person. I can imagine with them, like there's that need for, you said, maybe group validation, or maybe even having some sort of like group power, feeling really comfortable, a lot of friends. But with the moon in the seventh, it makes me think that this is a person who really values one-on-one communication, right? Like they're happy when they're like seeing themselves in another person.
Mhm.
Of course, that Saturn sort of complicates that story.
Yeah. Well, and I'm also looking at the moon is in an exact trine to Mercury. Jupiter is trying to inch closer to an exact trine, but is pretty well within orb of creating that water trine. So we have
Yeah.
a very emotional, intuitive person. And then Saturn and Venus are also trine to each other very closely. Now, this is a day chart. So we have Jupiter as being the benefic of the chart, and we have Mars as actually being sort of the challenger or the malefic of the chart. So looking at Venus and Saturn, they're not, heavy lifters in the
Yeah.
malefic benefic conversation, but Venus by default does things like values and does things like relationships. And she is in her own terms, just barely in
Mm.
Cancer. So she's quite strong in a very subtle way. And if we take in exaltation, Venus is exalted in Pisces, which is where Saturn is. So she kind of receives Saturn and understands Saturn and has that trine with Saturn. So
Oh,
there is
could I
kind of a dynamic there.
I'm going to back you up now. I'm going to dive into this because pretending I don't know astrology.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean? So we talked about planets have homes. They live there. They spend time in other people's houses. What does it mean when a planet
When a
is
planet is
exalted?
planted in its exaltation. Um,
What does it mean for a
yeah.
planet to be exalted?
Yeah. So every planet rules a house. We also call those, well, rules a sign.
Yeah.
So if a planet rules a sign, we call the sign that it rules its domicile.
Mhm.
Venus rules, this goes back to the Thema Mundi a little bit too. We should probably do an extra episode on this at some point.
Yes.
Venus rules your Taurus and your Libra. So in this chart, it would be the 9th and the 2nd. Much like we already talked about Mercury ruling the 1st and the 10th. Those are Mercury's domiciles.
Yep.
Now, each planet will typically have an exaltation as well. And for Venus, that is Pisces. Exaltation is kind of, it's still like up for debate. That's a flipping coin for a lot of people. Is like, is that stronger or not than a domicile? But it is a very strong position. I think William Lilly puts it as like 1 point on his point system less than domicile. So it's still very strong. Venus likes being there. For Venus especially, I like to say she's at home in Taurus, and Libra, she's at the spa being like catered to in Pisces.
Well, I'm gonna kind of add this up. So add to that.
Mm-hmm.
It is said, and maybe some theory, right, that an exalted planet is like a really welcome guest. So I'm just trying to put it in these frameworks. So if you don't know astrology, you're getting lost in this jargon, we can kind of get personal here. So like you said, like you go to the spa, right? Yeah. You're not at home. But the thing is, right, you have all these wonderful people who are following you around. They're handing you a robe. They're giving you some tea. They're massaging you. I can't speak today, right? That's an exalted planet. There tends to be the people around you lift you up, which is a lot different than just being in your own home, being able to grab your books from the bookshelf.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So with Saturn being in the place that Venus is exalted in, that puts Venus saying, oh, darling, I know that place really well. They love me there. Tell them you're my friend and they'll treat you well. Yeah. Yeah. I can see what my skits are going to do next week. So
we're talking about Saturn return. We can jump into that. Like this is
perfect.
Nice natal conversation, right? It's complicated, but there's like there's trines, there's some benefics involved. It's what would let's hop into the person's questions.
Yeah. So this person talks a little bit about their Saturn return. Very astutely, they've recognized that Saturn is coming into Pisces and their Saturn is in Pisces. So we're in the realm of a Saturn return here because Saturn has come back to the same sign that it was in when this person was born.
Yes.
So the question is, my moon and Saturn are in Pisces. Would that affect anything differently with my Saturn return? So in a sense, you wanted to bring up a technique that's outside of Western astrology and is more in the, I'm not sure of the most appropriate term of Vedic, Jyotish, or Indian. Whichever one, if you happen to know as a viewer or a listener, do let us know. We'd like to be correct we'd like to be doing the right thing rather than what we think is the correct thing. I'd rather do right than be right. Let's put it that way. So go ahead and let us know about was it a dasha that you were going to explain?
Well, it's a particular, it's not a time release system, but there's something in, I will say, Indian astrology, let's say that, called Sadi Sati. And it describes the period where Saturn goes over your moon, right? This is a little different because we get the Saturn return as well. So this person's more used to Saturn being with their moon. But that being said, it's a whole sort of area of study, and it's a very specific transit called Sadi Sati. And if you're interested to know more about it, right, it affects it can be a more difficult period, but it's going to affect people in different ways depending on what else is going in the chart. And we can reference episode 135 of the Astrology Podcast with Chris Brennan, who goes over this in depth. So again, Sadi Sati, look it up. It's something also one of my teachers, Adam Summer, talks about a lot too. So side note, take a deep dive into that. But now, if we're just talking about the quality of what this person can expect from their Saturn return, I'll hand it over to KristaLyn.
Yeah. So the first thing that we want to look at is Saturn doing Saturn things.
Yep.
So Saturn, by your general definition, is the planet of restriction. I jumped to that one first because it's so easy to remember, because Saturn literally wears a belt. The rings of Saturn are kind of like a restriction.
Yeah.
So you think about the structure, the restriction. I like to say you've built a tower and Saturn is going to check the masonry. And if it wasn't done well, it's going to fall over. And if it was done well, we're going to build onto it some more. So again, we have a daytime chart here. So if I'm looking at how equipped is Saturn to do more constructive things or more restrictive things, daytime chart lets us know that Saturn is actually not the out of sec malefic, which means he's not as cranky as he could be. It reminds me of Avatar: The Last Airbender, not as big of a jerk as you could have been a ward. So Saturn maybe, depending on other qualities, may be more constructive for this person. However, we're also looking at Saturn being angular. So this person is probably going to experience these situations more in their personal life and like notice them more up front and center. Very likely in seventh house situations. The seventh house is traditionally of marriage, contracts. This can also be other parties. So it's like a one-on-one conversation, and it's the person across the table from you. That can include clients, landlords, anybody that you're in a one-on-one connection with.
Yes. If this was building on this, if this was my client, I would say, okay, you're having your Saturn return in the 7th. The moon is there. Saturn is making the moon rules the 11th house. Anyway, that being said, oftentimes when Saturn goes to the 7th, there is this focus on who am I in relationship, right? Yeah. So if you're in a serious relationship with someone else, there might be some challenges that test that relationship. Boundary setting, right? A lot of times I've noticed people either get divorced or married, right? They either
create or sever the contract.
Exactly. Those are big, like Saturn and the 7th themes. Also, some people who've maybe never wanted to, maybe had a whole lot of emphasis in their life on relationship. Suddenly Saturn moves into the 7th and they're like, man, like, am I a good friend? How am I relating to other people, right? And also too, with this conversation with the 11th house, there could be this issue of, am I also that person who gets a significant other, that really strong Saturn in the 7th, and then maybe I leave my friends behind, right? So maybe there's that struggle to, how do I have a balanced relationship that doesn't feel too overwhelming? Those are some themes I might dive into with this client.
Yeah, and it's also important to remember that Saturn is returning. So this is Saturn emphasizing what Saturn's been doing this whole time, but just echoing it and turning up the volume a little bit. So you're not going through this whole new unforeseen thing. Saturn doesn't really do unpredictable as well. So Saturn is just coming by and giving an inspection to the existing structures. It's a test of strength, a test of durability, sometimes a test of endurance. All of those things with the moon here and with Saturn. So the moon ruling the 11th, Saturn ruling Aquarius and Capricorn, which in this case are the 5th and 6th houses. Yeah. We can see those things being drawn in to the way that we would interpret this. So we're looking at the moon. By basic definition, the moon is the body, your physical health, sometimes the motherhood or nurturer, in whatever capacity that looks like in your life experience. And also it's going to draw in themes about friends, long-term goals, wishes, things like that because of the 11th house. Saturn, of course, we talked, is restriction, structure, support, contracts, things like that. But it's also going to bring in some themes around the 5th and 6th house of creativity, children, leisure, and also your daily work, your physical health routine, the way you're of service to others. In Pisces, adding a little note to this, we're going to see this as Saturn in Pisces overall. We're going to have a lot of blurred lines. Saturn likes straight lines, very thickly drawn lines, boundaries even. Pisces likes to dissolve things like acid. So we're taking these lines, these boundaries, and maybe we're blurring them a little bit so we can explore what it's like not to have them and then redraw them where necessary, or maybe redraw them in a new way that's more supportive to what comes next. Maybe it wasn't working before.
Absolutely. And I will build on that to say that this is a unique situation for everyone with Saturn and Pisces, because for the last 5 or so years, Saturn has been moving through Saturn signs. So to some extent, you should probably already know the Saturn story, right? So maybe it started in your fifth house. There was some sort of, maybe you could say creative struggle, or there's some children, right? The sixth house is like, okay, what are my routines? Like, how do I take care of it? Whether it's my health or, the sort of mundane structures of my life, right? And now
Mhm.
when Saturn hits the seventh, it's like, okay, like I've been building here. Now, how do I make a life with someone else?
Yep.
And so
Yeah.
maybe there's also that sort of feeling of Saturn and Pisces is integrating the past 5 years.
Yeah. And to the point that we were making earlier about houses building upon one another, because of this, Saturn started out in about 2017, I believe,
Yeah.
going through Capricorn through 2020, the end of
Yeah.
2020. Then in 2020, Saturn already went through the sixth house. So these seems that Saturn is tying into sort of wrapping up the loose ends and
Yeah.
locking them into a contract of the seventh house. You've already experienced them a little bit. So there's kind of that benefit of not only is Saturn doing what Saturn does in your chart, but Saturn's already gone through and cleaned house in the signs that it rules. So
Yeah.
now you're putting the finishing touches, you're checking off the boxes, dotting T's, crossing T's and dotting I's.
No.
My goodness. And then you're seeing that showing up in areas that might involve other people, specifically friends, specifically people you partner with or cooperate with in a lot of situations. And because this person did ask, there was the question of, does Saturn return begin as soon as Saturn comes into Pisces? We noticed this person has Saturn at 11 degrees, Pisces nearly 12. So yes, because Saturn is in the Pisces realm already. So as of March 8th, March 7th, Saturn came into Pisces. You're going to start noticing themes around your Saturn return maybe popping up. You'll especially start noticing when Saturn approaches around 3 degrees before your Saturn. But for this person in particular, March 18th, 2024 is the exact Saturn return. So that'll be the climax of the story of the Saturn return. And fortunately for you, Saturn will not retrograde back over this degree. So you only have to really deal with that exact hit the one time. Then Saturn will move on. And by May 26, 2025, Saturn will move out of Pisces and into Aries for good.
Take note.
Yes.
Well stated. I'm going to, I have to say, the image of Saturn restriction because he wears a belt is something I am not ever going to forget. And now I'm imagining Saturn with this tool belt.
Yeah.
And he's coming around and he's checking the masonry to making sure it's a well constructed building. Thank you for giving me the gift of that vision, KristaLyn.
Yeah, I'm 3 years removed from my own Saturn return, but it's still fresh in my mind. So I had a lot of time to be thinking about how would I explain this to someone else? How am I going to help someone else go through this in a smoother way than I am? So that was some of the things that I had taken away. Often in Saturn return, you will return to something you loved to do as a child.
Yeah.
And realize that it's doable now. So it might be like a dream that felt very intangible then. And now you're realizing I'm an adult. I can do what I want. I can make this happen if I provide myself the resources and the tools. So you may find by the end of this, and again, you've got time, give yourself time and space to actually experience all these things because the experience makes the person. It will develop you into like a hero's training montage into the person who can do the thing. And again, if I just want to mention, as we're coming on this hour marking here, you can use this code that is now on the screen, Aries AMA, to get 10% off of a reading with CV and or myself on either of our websites. Yeah. So those are some things to think about for this Saturn return in this chart, and some general themes to think about if you're also going through a Saturn and Pisces return.
Yes, and I'll just one last thing to say is that with Saturn at the angle, right? You might notice that it's such a strong Saturn that I think of like once you figure out how to work with Saturn, if that you have been confused in your life, right? Maybe you haven't felt like there's been some restrictions around your social groups or maybe friends or partnerships, things like this, right? That this could be your time to like learn how to drive this vehicle. So when you're 32, 34, you look back and you're like, whoa, like I'm a completely different person. It's wild how Saturn, like that. I've seen so many people sort of really blossom from a Saturn return, even though perhaps it's maybe difficult in the moment because that's how we grow.
Yeah. I've noticed Saturn before a Saturn return, because we don't give ourselves credit for our own lived experience, we'll be looking for a mentor. or looking for someone to show us how to do the thing or someone to get us to where we want to go. Then after the Saturn return, or sometimes during, I know this happened for me, it was, why do I need someone else to do this with me? I'm just going to do it myself. And you have to have like a throwdown moment for that. But you have this moment where you're like, you know what? Forget trying to find someone to do it for me. I'm just going to do it myself. And I know that a lot of people find that moment, again, the necessity sort of leads to the innovation of I can do it myself because I've decided finally that I can. And then you make it work. And again, Saturn return is going to show up in a very unique way for every individual person. But that is definitely a repeated theme I've noticed for a lot of people.
Yes, I agree. And we've come to the end of our session.
Yeah.
So so everyone, the code is on the screen in pink. Thank you, KristaLyn, for that. We feel free to submit your questions to askmeastros@gmail.com for next month. If there's something you're curious about, we'll take a look at those. We do this every month. And as I've mentioned like 3 times already, we have just launched a Patreon. So if you like watching us and you want to get early access, to ask questions, to watch videos, sign up there. We're also including in that a bonus episode every month for patrons only, where we will do this, but it'll be more interactive. So you can come and bring your questions to us live, and we'll answer as many as we can. And we are also with that launching a cohort where you can take a deep dive into astrology with us every month. We're doing some writing exercises, some games. It's really us, how we personally explore astrology, and opening it up to share with those we are super stoked to learn with.
Yes.
What else am I missing?
I don't think you missed a thing. I think that was perfect.
Follow us on follow us each individually. We'll go there. Follow us on YouTube, and tell KristaLyn what's going on with you and where can people follow you.
Yeah, so people can follow me at The Real KristaLyn. There's only one. I had an imposter over the weekend again. I promise you, I do not use the phrase grand rising for anyone. Yeah, but you can follow me there on Instagram, on TikTok. I also am involved with the Alchemists Inkwell podcast and the Forgotten Storytellers story writing program, where the lecture that I mentioned earlier gets put into practice, and we help you write a story using your own intuition, your own divine timing, all of the fun things to make a difference in the world with fiction stories. And I do believe the retreats that I'm running to Greece and Ireland are currently full. So you can reach out to me, and if you're interested in those trips, and I will double check that for you personally, just in case a spot does open up, which it might. And yeah, so that's pretty much what I've got going on right now, I think.
Fantastic.
Yeah, how about you?
And I'm super stoked for Greece. We're going together. I just want to put that out there. So there will be we will make time for a live from Greece, I hope.
Yeah.
And so I'm CV Henriette. I work under the moniker Art of the Zodiac. I have a website, which I'm currently redoing, artofthezodiacs.co, but please follow me on Instagram. I just launched a Substack. I'm a consulting astrologer, as is KristaLyn, but my love in life, aside from consulting astrology and talking astrology, is interviewing people. So I have a podcast called Talk, where I interview artists and astrologers. As I mentioned, I just recorded an episode with my dear friend, Kristen Mathis, who's on this journey through Thema Mundi to translate the Orphic hymns. Brilliant. So please follow me in all the places to sign up for those interviews. And if you are one of our Patreon subscribers, you'll be getting some bonus talk stuff there as well. So what a fun day. This has been lovely, KristaLyn.
Yeah. Happy Aries ingress to everyone. Happy equinox, whether it be spring or autumn, wherever you are. And happy solar return to CV.
Yes. Okay, beautiful friends. Bye.